Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Friday Noonday Concert here at Fourth Presbyterian Church in downtown Chicago. My name is Emma Cox. I'm the music department manager. It is a wonderful, wonderful blessing to be able to see every single one of you in person and on the live stream at home. Thank you for joining us on this gorgeous sunny Friday afternoon. We're going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we announce today's artist. If you could take your cell phones off and put those on silent, and then flip your program to the very back. You can see the next couple of performers that are coming in the next few weeks. Next week, we have Rachel Sittimer. I am very excited about this. Rachel is a cabaret artist from New York City. She's an award-winning artist who's going to be performing her original show called Motherhood. It's going to collect songs from the Golden American Broadway standards, jazz standards, and just beautiful, like classically trained songs that I think everyone can relate to. And the themes around motherhood and mothers in our hearts. So that'll be wonderful. The next week, we have our interim director of music, Dr. Douglas Cleveland. He's going to be performing with a member of our morning choir, Laura Perquette, and they're going to be doing oboe and organ duets. I believe one of the pieces is an original composition by Laura. So this is going to be really exciting as too. Please come both in person and tune in at home for those. If you could flip it to the front, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Janelle. Janelle is also not only a performer, and she's in very high demand as a performer, she's also in high demand as a teacher. And in 2 weeks' time, she's going to have 33 of her harp students on May the 31st performing at Lynn Healy Hall. That's on the corner of Lake and Ogden. It is a free performance to everybody, so if you'd love to come and support some young musicians, some young harpists, it will be at 12:30 and at 1:45. If you'd like to get a little bit more information about that, meet me in the back, and I'm happy to tell you a little bit more. Please make sure that your cell phones are on silent. Feel free to take videos. Feel free to take pictures. Tag her on social media. We love exposing our artists. But please remain seated while you take those, just so we don't interfere with anybody's sight lines. Now, please put your hands together and welcome to the stage, Janelle Jansen Lake.
Thank you for coming on this gorgeous Friday afternoon. My name is Janelle, and I'm just delighted to be here. I love performing in my hometown. I've been performing in Panama, and I've been performing, believe it or not, on a private jet. So kind of in the space of the air, and it's nice to be home and playing music that I love. In the harp capital of the world, I say that because we have the world's largest harp factory here, the Lyon & Healy, where my student recital will be in a few weeks. Did you know that Lyon & Healy is one of the top 3 oldest companies in Chicago? We had a button factory, and Lyon & Healy made, that's older, Lyon & Healy has been making harps since before the Great Chicago Fire, and the way that they were able to survive that fire was because, well, the building did burn, but they made quite a fortune in the 1800s selling sheet music. That was the entertainment of the day, mostly piano sheet music. And so when they bought their fire insurance policy and the building burned down, they were able to continue flourishing and creating instruments and making the music. Now, I got involved in the harp, mostly deeper in the harp world when I worked at the Venus Harp Factory. Believe it or not, we had 2 of the world's largest harp factories right here in Chicago. And you might wonder, why is Chicago so special about harps? Now imagine in the 1900s when America is working on establishing its own culture and its identity, we wanted some high art. And so a lot of the rich families would send their daughters to learn to play the harp. Now, the harp makers in Europe couldn't get their harps across the ocean. The sea, the salt air would damage the instruments, the wood. And so they thought, well, major woods of the Midwest, Wisconsin had all of the beautiful wood, and major metropolitan area of Chicago, it's a match made in heaven, pun completely intended. That was Angelus that I just played by Henriette Renier. She was a harpist in the 1800s, early 1900s. One of my favorite artists and one of my favorite pieces to teach, to use the whole space and make beautiful sound. So when I worked at the Venus Harp Factory, we learned about the history of the instrument, where really this instrument that you see on the stage, not this actual piece, this one I bought in the 90s, my parents bought for me, that's a long story. But the instrument that you see, the double action pedal harp, wasn't invented until the early 1800s by Sebastian Erard. And Sebastian Erard in Europe, in London, he made this double action pedal harp. Before that, you would have heard very diatonic, like a piano. So you would have had all the red strings are C, all the black strings are F, and we wouldn't have used our pedals as much. The pedals, there are 7-foot pedals. They control the sharps and flats. They run up through the column, and they change the sharps and flats by tightening and loosening the discs. And so when Alphonse Hasselmans in the 1800s wrote this next piece I'm about to play, it was really the first time that a composer had used this type of harp to make that pentatonic, watery sound that we hear. So I hope that you enjoy the full double action of this instrument with our pedals in order from D, C, B, E, F, G, A. They control each of those musical letters of the alphabet. And when I put the A pedal up, for example, all of the A's are flat. And when I put the A in the middle, all of the A's are natural. And then down, of course, is A sharp. And so you'll hear quite a bit of that double, even though I'm playing 2 different strings, I get the same pitch. And it makes it sound like my fingers are really flying, but I'm really only using 8 of them, so we don't use our pinkies. They are too short. So we use our 8 fingers. And I'll stop gabbing because I could tell you about the love of my instrument all day, but I'll tell you more after this piece. This is Alphonse Hasselmans' La Source. Thank you so much. That was La Source, which means the wellspring or the water. I've always imagined it as a trickling fountain. And the next piece I'm playing is also by Alphonse Hasselmans. And I wanted to tell you a story when I used to work at the Venus Harp Factory. So at the Venus Harp Factory, the master craftsmen had worked there for years. Many of them started working at Lyon and Healy. And when CBS, the broadcasting company, in 1969 bought Lyon and Healy, and they said to the master craftsmen, well, we know you've always made your instruments a certain way, and we're going to change the way you do it and do it differently. And they said, well, we prefer not to do that. And they started their own company, and they worked at the Venus Harp Factory from 1969 all the way until it closed in 2008. And I had the joy of working there. Oh, I'm so sorry. That is the wrong date. They closed in 2000. I'm doing math. My daughter was born. After my daughter was born in 2018. There we go. I was there for 8 years. One of my jobs was to test the harps before we sent them around the world. Now, Chicago, as you saw yesterday from the weather, is just completely, can be, if you don't like the weather, wait a minute and it'll change. So the beautiful thing about Chicago is that the wood for the instrument gets to experience the hot and the dry and the humid and the cold. And so we got to play the instruments before we sent them to Thailand and to China and to Africa and Europe, and we would rather find any issues as they arose. So I got paid to practice. It was lovely. But one day, and this is an experience that speaks to the craftsmanship of the harp makers and the balance of the instrument, I was asked to put the strings on. They were a little behind in the production. The business was booming, harps were flying out the door. And sure, I can tie a string, no problem. That is part of, it wasn't my job description, but I'm happy to help in any way that I can. And so I'm tying the strings. Now the gentleman had put the strings, the bass wires, these are made out of metal. They're a steel string with a cotton core wrapped around that. And then they have a nickel or a silver plating wrapped around that. And these ones are gut. They used to be cat gut. We don't do that anymore. Then they were cow gut, and then they were sheep gut. Now we're back to cow gut. I actually broke one. That's why you see me tuning it quite frequently. I broke it last night with the weather change. And then these ones are nylon. They can be gut, but in the Chicago changing climate, I would rather have a very sure string that won't break on me as often. So this particular day, the gentleman had asked me to put the extra strings on. Now they had tied these strings up because I'm very short, so standing on my tiptoes and trying to pull these strings up to pitch, that's a muscle I don't have. I would get tired easily. They were very kind to do that for me. And then they had tied all of the knots in the middle of the harp for the strings, and I just kind of put them out of the way so that they're not flapping all over. And then these strings were up, and I thought, well, I can start there. So imagine with me, these strings are tied, and then these strings I started, and just like a bow and arrow, if you imagine the soundboard being pulled from this end, and then pulled from that end, the entire soundboard, it ripped right off the instrument with the balance of the strings was not in balance. And I had to stand in my office and walk out to these gentlemen and say that I ruined about 2 years of their work because I didn't know better. And my punishment was that they asked me to learn how to build a harp. And it was such an empowering punishment and so kind, where this harp for many of us feels like magic happens here. And it is magic and lots of hard work. But it is the harp makers stressed that we wore the instrument as musicians, and this is a very expensive chunk of wood that allows us to do our job as a tool. And that was very kind and empowering. So the next piece I'm going to play is also by Alphonse Hasselmans, and it is called May Song, Chanson de Mai. So you'll hear the weather. I'm so glad I programmed this the night after a storm, because most of the time in May, the weather is lovely, and then there's some interesting bits. Thank you. I've actually never performed that, so I was delighted that just, we have such a wonderful audience today, and it's so nice to be here. The next piece I'm going to play was a student of Alphonse Hasselmann's. So Alphonse Hasselmann's gave us this traditional harpy sound that we just heard, and then Carlos Salcedo, one of his students, decided the harp is a percussion instrument, and so let's see how many different colors and timbres we can get beyond this beautiful watery sound. So this next piece is called Chanson dans la nuit, pardon my French, Song in the Night, and it doesn't have necessarily a specific storyline that Carlos Salcedo told himself. Now, he had a harp colony in Maine where people would go to study the harp. You know, the rich 1% families would send their daughters to Camden, Maine, and then also, of course, many other students had the opportunity to study with him. To put it into perspective, a harp lesson with Carlos Salcedo cost $60 in the early 1900s, and Harpo Marx, he bought his harp in 9 installments of $5 each. So his harp cost $45. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't buy a new harp every week. So it was quite a privilege to study with Carlos Salcedo, who told this new story. And the story that I was told about this piece is that there's a person falling asleep, and he hears these weird, it feels like an unusual night, and the clock is ticking, and you'll hear with the harmonics, the steadiness of the bell tone of the clock ticking. And then I hear a trumpet fanfare, and I pluck that with my nails. Normally, I have very short nails, and so we work to get our fingernail sound in there. And then I hear, and I've always imagined that to be the trumpet fanfare announcing the parade that is therefore going to come through. You'll hear what I think are the Arabian dancers, and then I imagine he has enough. He needs to get his sleep. He closes the door as I use the instrument's wooden body to slam the shutters. And then he tries to fall asleep in a fitful dream. So this is Chanson de la Nuit. That's a fun one. Marcel Grangeny, the next composer, was also one of Hasselmann's students. And it's such a fun testimony to the true artistry and the spirit of an individual's expression that the same teacher can produce such drastically different composers. So the next piece is called Barcarolle. It's very short. I just wanted to put something on that demonstrates the individuality of the artist when they have the same main influence in their life. Now, Marcel Grandgeny and Carlos Salcedo would have been at the Paris Conservatory, and they would have known each other. They studied together with Alphonse Hasselmans. And there's a joke that I always tell my students. How many harpists does it take to screw in a light bulb? It takes 5. 1 person to screw the actual light bulb, and 4 to tell them how to do it differently. So this is a testimony of individuality. I hope you enjoy Barcarolle. So I don't normally get to tell this next story on stage because it's usually an audience full of children that in the season, not that I'm going to say anything explicit or inappropriate, just that it's lost on the youth. When I was, let's say, a formative age, 9/11 happened, and I was in charge of a class of kindergartners. And these kindergartners had such wonderful questions for me at a young age. They asked, did they do it on purpose? And of course, I couldn't lie. I have no lying face. Everything I think comes out of my mouth. And why did they do it? And I ultimately told them that they needed hugs and just they didn't have the support they needed. And that was the best answer I could give at a young age to a bunch of children. And then the best piece of art that I consumed in my entire life. Now this is, for me, I make high art, if I do say so myself, all day long. I am in the harp world. I have 6 performances this weekend playing music that is very challenging and intellectually provoking. And so I love high art, and that's a great party question if you ever ask someone what high art is. That's my favorite dinner time conversation. But the best piece of art that I ever consumed was actually from a satirical newspaper called The Onion. And now imagine, I can still see her face. She has resting, cheerful face. You know, sometimes people have resting, glowering face. I've heard it called nastier things, but she had resting, cheerful face. And the headline said, "Woman bakes cake shaped like American flag." And next to that piece, the headline news of this pretend newspaper was in tiny print, "Massive attack on the Pentagon," page 14 news. But this newspaper that said, "Woman bakes cake in the shape of American flag," did 2 things for me. It gave me permission to laugh again, to make light and to make joy in the situation of a horrible situation. And then it also explained to me, I have the opportunities that I have. I have wonderful opportunities. If you read my bio, I've had some really fun experiences in life. And I reflected on other people who play the harp. And you know, can I sit in a room and play harp at a time where something horrible is happening? And I'm thinking about King David in the Bible, and here is one of the most legendary kings. He's documented, he's gone through wars, he's had his personal life 2,000 years later still talked about, all of his drama. And he's sitting, and he was a harpist, and he's sitting and playing the harpist, and these details of the art and the joy and the beauty that he created are what came that we still talk about. And I imagine all of the other uplifting opportunities there are in the little things to create art, like my mother noticing that the black lily had bloomed today in her garden, or woman bakes cake, and my daughters looking for treasures in the dirt and flowers, and the little tiny joys in life. And my friend Brandy Younger, we have birthdays. It's so nice in the harp world. We have birthdays 4 days apart. So Brandy Younger is a harpist in New York. She's a wonderful jazz, Grammy-nominated instrumentalist. And when we are lone colleagues, meaning quite often I'm going to work by myself, all day by myself, it's nice to have somebody on that journey with you. And Brandy Younger in 2007 was contacted by the Alice Coltrane Foundation. Now, Alice Coltrane was married to John Coltrane, the saxophonist. And when John Coltrane passed away in 1969, he had ordered a harp from Lyon & Healy. And then, unfortunately, it wasn't delivered to their home until posthumously, until he was no longer there to play the harp. And now Alice said, "There is no way an instrument will stay in my home without being played, without being enjoyed." And so she learned to play the harp. And she was a great harpist. She made art that is inimitable. And then in 2007, the Alice Coltrane Foundation asked Brandy to work with a lot of the art that she had created. And Brandy shared this transcription of Stevie Wonder's "If It's Magic." So this past December, I have kids the same age as Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins, and one of the opportunities I was given was to play harp at this rock star's house, and I also was able to play at their wedding, and it's just been a delightful fever dream of a world to be sitting next to classically trained musicians. And he also owns the Wrestling Association, and so you have professional athletes, wrestlers, and artists, and then you have rock stars, and then so many different types of people in one room. And I got to be the fly on the wall for an eye-opening conversation. I was playing Christmas music, and I hear Billy Corgan talking to, I know he was a billionaire, and the billionaire asked him, well, when will you retire? And, thinking only monetarily, and he said, well, when I stop caring about what my art sounds like and the impact that I can make, then I'll stop making art, and as if it's not part of how we live. But then I also found out that, and he wouldn't mind me sharing this, that his voice, he went to a throat doctor, and his voice box is the same biologically as an 8-year-old boy's. So, you can think about how children can kind of yell all night and not get tired voice-wise. Adults, we will lose our voice if we raise our voice all night. And so he shared some other rock stars that have the same biological build, and it was just I have the 8 fingers that I'm given, well, I have 10 fingers, but we only use 8 of them. And it's wonderful to be able to make the music, and I appreciate you being there to listen, and thank you so much for coming. This is 1979, flowing into Billy Corgan's Today. And he'll be at the Lyric Opera the week of Thanksgiving. So I couldn't help but program, if you told teenage Janelle that I would be able to play rock music in a church, this would have been it is a very exciting moment for me. So I appreciate the crossover that this rock star is bringing to Chicago, using the classically trained musicians at the Lyric Opera to make Melancholy in the Infinite Sadness, and to make that's one of his albums, to make some new art. That's very exciting. Here's 1979 and Today. Thank you. The last piece that I'll be playing is something that I end almost every piece of every program that I perform with, and it's an American in Paris and Rhapsody in Blue, a transcription and an arrangement by harpist Eleanor Fell. I take a lot of liberties, but the reason that I love to perform this piece so much is because my grandmother, she was mother of 6, quite a talented pianist, and in the throes of Alzheimer's that ultimately took her, she was not quite with us, but whenever you brought her to the piano, she would play Rhapsody in Blue. And she would play the same page until you turned the page for her. She would play that over and over again. And she would play this beautifully. And my cousin, he plays with Wynton Marsalis, Dan Nimmer out in New York. He's a very talented pianist too. And I like to think that our musicianship came from being part of this musical family and all of the exposure that we got from our grandmother. And when my cousin got married, different cousin, I was playing this piece, and my grandmother came out of her cloudy eyes and looked at the harp and said, "That is beautiful." And that's the last thing she ever said to me. And the hope is to play beautiful music and to enjoy a moment of beauty. I hope you get that.